secure. May every being dwell in harmony and reach nirvana's boundless peace. All those invisible or outstanding, dwelling near or far away, all that are born or awaiting birth, for always may they dwell in joy. May they all receive proper care. May every being live life secure. May every being dwell in harmony and reach nirvana's boundless peace.
Good morning. My name is Carl Wilmson, and I'm going to read Golden Chain 2. I am a link in the Buddha's golden chain of love that stretches around the world. I must keep my link bright and strong. I will try to be kind and gentle to every living thing and protect all who are weaker than myself. I will try to think pure and beautiful thoughts, to say pure and beautiful words, and to do pure and beautiful deeds, knowing that on what I do now depends not only my happiness or unhappiness, but also that of others. May every link in the Buddha's golden chain of love become bright and strong, and may we all attain perfect peace. Nam Amida Butsu, Nam Amida Butsu, Nam Amida Butsu.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? I am so happy to be here again and see you, even though I can't actually see anybody. But I like to think that we are still connected. Thank you to Reverend Kuwahara for allowing me to speak today at one of our virtual services here at Berkeley Buddhist Temple. I'm going to go ahead and open with Gassho, so if you'll join me over here at my home Butsudan. Thank you for showing it some love today. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namandabs, Namandabs, Namandabs. Thank you again. It appreciates it. So again, how's everybody? I'm hoping that most people watching this have had the chance to get the vaccine by now. I know our younger kids are still waiting, but I think we're happy to acknowledge that the vaccines have been very effective at containing the pandemic in the United States, and things are opening up. Our state of California is open, Disneyland is open, Berkeley Buddhist Temple is open on a limited basis on select Sundays for quiet sitting only, inquire within. But hey, that's progress. We're inching there bit by bit. We're hearing a lot about going back to normal, going back to the normal things that we can do that we used to do before and that we can enjoy again. For myself, a couple weeks ago, I went to a dinner with my high school friends at someone's house. We were all vaccinated. It was wonderful. We hadn't seen each other in the 15 months. It was great to be with people. It was great to see three-dimensional faces, to hear chatter and laughter and different parts of the room that are apart from me. When you kind of live online, we're just sort of used to seeing these inputs coming at us all the time, and it's great to be out there as part of life. It's not just about the screen, as much as I appreciate that we're here, but it's about being part of life that's all around us, and it's been great to sort of get back to that a bit. So as we move into this future, this post-pandemic future, I can't help but think of the moment that I went into CVS Pharmacy back in April and actually got my vaccine shot. I remember when I went inside to check in, things were kind of tense. This was a point where there was still more demand than supply. So people were just very, they wanted to have their spot in line, get their shot. You could just feel that kind of tension in the room. And, we hadn't had our shot yet, so we're also in a room with a bunch of people. But, we got to the back, we checked in, they gave us our vaccine cards, and, then they stuck us. So we got that stick, and after that, I think this process was the same everywhere, but if you recall, if you've had your vaccine, you're asked to wait for about 15 minutes to make sure that there's no, allergic reaction, very rare thing that can happen. So they have you, for us at CVS, they actually had chairs in the aisles with the various pharmaceutical goods that we were spaced out to sit in, and the pharmacist would walk around every few minutes and he would check in on us to make sure we were okay. And so, I'm sitting in these chairs, and when he comes around, the pharmacist would ask a very specific question. And so this is the question he would ask us. Do you feel exactly the same as you did when you walked in here? I'll say it one more time. Do you feel exactly the same as you did when you walked in here? So you can see I'm smiling at this question for many reasons. I understand his meaning is to check to see if I still feel well, and if I was experiencing any symptoms from getting the shot. He wanted me to make him aware. So the answer he wants to hear is that I feel exactly the same, that I'm fine. But of course, from a Buddhist perspective, I'm snickering because the answer is no. I do not feel exactly the same as when I walked inside the pharmacy. In this kind of Buddhist, philosophical, non-self way, there's this idea that, we're changing moment by moment, that the self is an illusion. And so, of course, there's no way to feel exactly the same. Each moment is a discrete slice of life, with its own causes and conditions. But, I'm not going to get into that philosophical aspect today in this talk because, I'm honestly not sure I'm really equipped to get at that, to explore that. But besides, the point here is if I had told the pharmacist, well, actually there is no self to feel exactly the same, I don't think he would have appreciated that response. So I did, what I was expected. I answered, yes, I feel exactly the same as when I walked in, because I didn't want the pharmacist to freak out. But I knew within the answer was no. So since then, I've been thinking about how and why I'm not exactly the same, not feeling exactly the same as when I walked into the CVS pharmacy to get my vaccine. And I would like to explore this question a bit with you today, because many people have been, waiting so anxiously until we can go back to the same activities we enjoyed before the pandemic. And yet, there are also these changes that are arising because many people are realizing that they no longer feel exactly the same as they did before. A lot has happened in our lives throughout the pandemic. Major events and individual experiences. What seems to have made this past year unique to me is that as these events have happened, we have been largely restricted to, from this comforting rhythm of our everyday lives, jobs, activities, errands, things that just kind of happen week in and week out. We were also restricted from the ability to process these events together in the same room, beyond maybe your immediate family. In this way, even though we were able to stay connected virtually, we were sort of yanked away from the world, held at a distance from it, a remove. As Buddhists, we've had gratitude and appreciation to turn to, and I think that this was a huge source of comfort and strength. We considered how delicate our lives were with appreciation for all the essential workers who were helping us. We had newfound gratitude for our homes and our families, in ways that we may have overlooked from time to time. I would go on walks and I would, notice all kinds of trees and flowers and natural beauty working together harmoniously as I imagined it. I know there's competition in nature as well. There's actually a great documentary called The Year the Earth Changed on Apple TV Plus. And it was about how nature was kind of able to heal itself just a little bit, after all this time of human expansion and encroachment on their territory. It's great. And I think about that, and I just remember, at least in Berkeley, how, I could truly hear the birds in a new way during this time as things kind of got quieter. I don't know if other ones came in, but it was just really beautiful. So all kinds of experiences were happening, an appreciation for all we have, all the ways we are interconnected and dependent on each other for our survival. Alongside our gratitude, there was a collective recognition of injustice, inequality, divisive political conflicts, and a desire for social change. It was 12 months ago, just 12 months ago, that I spoke to you about my own experience with COVID as we headed into a summer of national protests for racial justice. I spoke again in November, just after the brutal presidential election, but before the even more brutal insurrection at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And here we are now, in the middle of a year which has seen continued rough spots. Spike in crime, rise of anti-Asian violence, maybe some small steps toward justice, the recent conviction and sentencing of the officer who murdered George Floyd, and depending on what you think, maybe some possible government action on inequality. We may not all have the same view of these events or experience of these events, but I consider this experience collective in a way that I've never known in my life. There are events where we'll always remember, where we were when it happened, but not so many events like the pandemic, where what happened lasted for so long and took all of us out of our lives as we had known them up to that point. This has been a rare event that the world truly experienced together, while we've also observed the different ways that it's impacted countries, communities, and ourselves. And so in light of this, I don't think it's a surprise that as we move toward going back to the activities we enjoyed before, we realize that we don't feel exactly the same as we did before it started. And as we once again appreciate these kind of comforts that we've enjoyed, the rhythm of our everyday lives, socializing, work, restaurants, errands, we're also starting to see other movements playing out in our economy, kind of, refractions of what has happened over this past year. It's not all just back to normal. The housing market is kind of on fire, as they say. There's people moving to more affordable cities where they can potentially work remotely. That's a huge change. There are millions of people leaving their jobs altogether because, they've seen what not centering life on, that particular job or office or that commute, has really meant to their lives and their families. At the same time, there are lower paying jobs that are really having trouble finding workers because the workers, unsurprisingly, don't want to go back to working in these conditions that maybe they didn't realize were so tough for them until, something had changed. Interestingly, this past week was Amazon's Prime Day, this kind of mega sale day that Amazon invented, and apparently that didn't even do so well this year. Meaning, maybe we're a little less focused on buying stuff for the moment. But that's a real shocker for American commerce. It's probably fleeting, but these are just a few changes. Something that is different post-pandemic, and maybe some of these things that I mentioned are considered superficial. But I think even if this behavior reflects people making these kind of surface changes to their lives, where it is coming from, I think, is not superficial. Having been removed from the rhythm, removed from the world in some way, we've seen it in a new light and it's still affecting us today. All the proactive things that we like to do in our lives to take control, we didn't have the same power to do that, for a while. We tried to be proactive in our own ways. We organized virtual events and activities. We adjusted to these pandemic lives, but we were largely, reacting to these events, reacting to our limitations. And I think reacting to our fears of the unknown or of getting sick, by pulling together as best as we could. So now we have this vaccine, and it's removed this huge obstacle, and we're told it's okay to go back into the world, even as we continue to internally react and reflect on the events of this past year. We may look at the world, and in some ways maybe we do want it to be the same, to feel just as normal as we did before. But the reality that we've just experienced tells us that our world is not the same. And maybe the way that we engaged the world before has an opportunity to change as well. This idea, this moment of change in our approach to the world, I think is at the very heart of Buddhism. It is this awakening that caused Shakyamuni Buddha to declare a path to the end of suffering. And it is this awakening that caused Shinran Shonin to embrace a life of Nembutsu, a life of taking refuge in the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings. Shinran founded our tradition, Jodo Shinshu, nearly 800 years ago. Like many discoveries that we make in our lives, Shinran's awakening was the product of a lot of challenges and difficulties in his life. He had grown up as a monk in the Tendai tradition. By most accounts, he was not a super prominent monk, and his life of monastic practice was very intense and ritual heavy. We may think of our own rituals and chanting taking up some time at the beginning of our services, but Shinran served in what was called a Jogyo-do, or hall of constant practice. There were 90-day, not 90-minute, 90-day Nembutsu meditation retreats in which they constantly walked around and around a large statue of Amida Buddha, constantly chanting the Nembutsu, Namandavs, 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 visualizing this pure land, doing all of these rituals in order to achieve liberation, to proactively get themselves to the Pure Land. This seemed to be the idea. And this is what Shinran did. And after many years, he said, I can't do this anymore. He just couldn't do it. Something about his daily life that he had accustomed himself to felt unfulfilling. And remember, for Shinran, this was his world. Right? This was a Buddhist world, it was a Nembutsu world, and yet the way he was operating in this world wasn't working for him anymore. So eventually he finds his teacher Honen, who's another monk, who is very publicly and prominently questioning the Buddhist status quo. And Honen shares with him another way to look at the Nembutsu. Honen tells Shinran that liberation is all about the Nembutsu, nothing else. And taking refuge in it is not only all that is necessary, all that you need to do, but in some respects, it's all that we can do. We may tell ourselves that we're proactive, but it's living this kind of life in which we only try to satisfy our own needs and our own desires that we miss out on the reality, the ultimate reality of our interdependence. And after learning about the Nembutsu in this way from Honen, Shinran didn't say, oh, great, that's a great perspective, thanks, and then go back to chanting around the statue again in the hall of constant practice. He was still a Buddhist. He still took refuge in Amida Buddha, but through this new view, it was like he'd been given a vaccine, and he wasn't going to go back to the same world as before. He would share the Nembutsu with others for the rest of his life, in hopes that they too might see the world differently than before. And it was not easy for him. It might seem easy, I guess, for us to say, let it go and say, yes, I take refuge in the Buddha. But then, as I said, the rhythm of our lives kind of sets in, and we go back to that rhythm, the rhythm of the self, the rhythm of ego. Shinran had many challenges with followers of his own that interpreted the Nembutsu in this way. It was it started to be thought of as a golden ticket. I've got my ticket, I've got my vaccine, so I'm good. I can behave however I want now. And Shinran would write these letters, to his followers and kind of say, no, you've got it all wrong. Once you realize that the Buddha Dharma is here to guide you and you take refuge, that's when your life begins to change. He said that embracing the Nembutsu should lead us to this kind of change, a change in the heart. He also mentions having a deep warmth for friends and fellow practicers, and that this change was actually a sign. It was a sign of rejecting this world. So one of the reasons I felt so nourished and inspired in our temples is because, I often feel a shared perspective at work. People ask questions, they work together, and treat each other in ways that reflect kindness and humility. In many ways, it's not like the world out there. In other ways, it might be. We have to be honest and fair with ourselves, but it's different. I'm not trying to prop us up and say we're all so amazing, but I can say that I know how special it is to have our Sangha, to have our lives nurtured by the Nembutsu. And, it can also just be fun to be with each other and to be together. Buddhism can sometimes have a negative association with this kind of phrasing, this idea of reject the world. Buddhists, this idea that Buddhists maybe meditate or they go away or they, reject life in some way. But when Shinran said this, I don't believe this was his meaning at all. He was saying that what we should reject is our selfishness. It doesn't go away, but in taking refuge, we reject a world that revolves around the self. Placing our trust in the Buddha, we take refuge in the power beyond the self, this greater working. Our path isn't about rejecting life. It's opening ourselves to seeing it, to reacting to it with appreciation for our shared humanity and the opportunity to work through our shared ignorance together. There are many points throughout our lives when we have the opportunity to reject our selfishness. And when I see the recent events I mentioned, the social justice movements, even these personal decisions, life and work changes, I think they may be coming from a newfound appreciation for life's impermanence, and our interdependence. It's not that people are using this specific language to say this is why I want change. And it may end up that this shift we're seeing, ends up giving way to the rhythms of selfishness again over time. We may find ourselves chasing fleeting pleasures once again, and eventually things would start to feel exactly or roughly the same as before. But what I see now is an opportunity that is maybe not unprecedented, but extremely rare. And that's for a common understanding of our shared humanity that leads to a change on a global level. I think our Shin Buddhist teachings provide a wonderful language that points the way, and that the Nembutsu can be a declaration of common understanding, a declaration that in rejecting a world of selfishness, we take refuge in a larger embrace that has been there all along. This is the Buddha's golden chain of love that stretches around the world. It shows us that even in the depths of impermanence, we are connected, and we cannot ignore those connections. Choosing to be guided by the Nembutsu, we are able to embrace ourselves and our world for what it is and what it can be. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you today. I look forward to seeing you in person someday soon. We're going to close out over here at the Butsudan once again. Namo Mita Boots, Namo Mita Boots, Namo Mita Boots, Namandavs, Namandavs, Namandavs. Until next time.